10. Instagram Trash Talk. On August 9, 2022, deputies in Orange County, Florida responded to a 911 call. A man phoned the police saying he was shot. When deputies arrived at the cul-de-sac in Zellwood, they found a deceased 23-year-old man. His name was DeMonte Sherry, and his body was found riddled with gunshot wounds. The killer was eventually identified as 19-year-old Malik Fisher, who was subsequently arrested and charged with first-degree murder. According to investigators, conflict had arisen between the two men because of a dispute on social media. 8 days before the shooting, DeMonte Sherry was on Instagram Live, talking about some friends of his who'd been killed in Central Florida. That was when Malik Fisher joined the feed, threatening him and bad-mouthing DeMonte's dead friends publicly. What should have ended on Instagram spilled over into real life. On the morning of August 9th, Malik Fisher and his buddies were sitting in a car when DeMonte happened to drive directly in front of them. The unexpected encounter had Malik running up to DeMonte's car with his gun drawn. He pointed it at the driver's window and opened fire, subsequently hitting DeMonte at close range. And all because of some Instagram trash talk gone seriously wrong. In the end, Malik was arrested and charged with first-degree murder, but the case is ongoing. 9. Jessica's Volkswagen. Jessica Beauvais killed an NYPD officer on April 27, 2021. She drove into him with her Volkswagen after going on an irate tirade on Instagram about how useless cops are. She hit the officer so hard with her vehicle that he was thrown 200 feet, 61 meters into the air, knocked straight out of his boots. She was charged with manslaughter and several other offenses in connection to the death of Officer Anastasios Tsakos. Officer Tsakos was directing traffic away from a deadly crash that had just happened on the Long Island Expressway in Queens. It was early on a Tuesday morning, and the day was already off to a bad start. But then came Jessica hurtling toward multiple officers in her maroon Volkswagen. The other cops managed to get out of the way, but Tsakos was struck and thrown onto the grassy median. The veteran of 14 years on the force died shortly after from massive head injuries at the New York Presbyterian Hospital. As that was happening, 32-year-old Jessica fled the scene. She committed a hit and run and tried to escape before anyone could track her down. But seeing as she ran over a cop, she was captured rather quickly afterward. Officers found Jessica's blood alcohol level to be over double the legal limit when she was tested 2 hours after the crash. And before the incident, she'd posted a live stream on Facebook of approximately 1 hour and 51 minutes. In the recording, she could be seen shooting tequila shots and bad-mouthing the police. Suffice to say, trash-talking the cops really hasn't helped her case after running over one. 8. Justine's tweet. Justine Sacco was public enemy number 1 in 2013. After becoming one of the first people to gain infamy by bad-mouthing on Twitter. Justine made a tweet that resulted in her getting fired from her job as Senior Director of Corporate Communications at IAC, an internet services company. She also became a public pariah after the fact, and her life was left in shambles. Justine was born in 1983, and she studied at Toole University, where she graduated with a bachelor's degree in philosophy. Other than that, not a whole lot is known about her. Ever since her famous tweet ruined her life, she's remained out of the spotlight and largely off social media. In December of 2013, Justine got on a plane destined for South Africa. Before she took off, she tweeted, "Going to Africa. Hope I don't get AIDS. Just kidding, I'm white." She likely thought it was hilarious, but nobody else found it funny. Her flight was 11 hours, and by the time she landed, the world was already outraged. The tweet became the #1 trending topic in the world while Justine was still napping on the airplane. By the time she got to South Africa, her life had changed forever. Even though Justine made a public apology and insisted the tweet had been satire, not literal, she was still fired. And although her life was ruined at first, Her LinkedIn profile seems to suggest she's since recovered. She's been the VP of Communications for Match Group since 2020. But there's still many people who refer to Justine Sacco as the very first casualty of cancel culture. 7. The League of Legends terrorist. In 2013, Justin Carter from Texas had a bad match of League of Legends, a popular video game, and started trash-talking his opponents. Not only did Justin badmouth the people he was in a match with, he also took to Facebook and started ranting about some pretty crazy things. He made some broad threats about some educational institutions, which resulted in him being arrested by the police. He was a 19-year-old kid who took out his anger from a video game by saying ridiculous things on Facebook, earning him a felony terrorist threat charge. Justin was arrested in San Antonio at his place of work and was held on a $250,000 bond. During his initial few months in the Comal County Jail, he was allegedly assaulted and beaten to a severe degree. This was all despite the fact that Justin didn't own any weapons, and he'd never indicated he had terroristic thoughts. He did, however, have a long history of crude and dark humor on Facebook. Justin's case was dragged through the court system for 5 years before it was finally put behind him in 2018, when he agreed to plead guilty to a Class A misdemeanor so he could get on with his life. 6. Tired of the trash talk. A man in Las Vegas was recently facing an open murder charge after he ran over a homeless man. David Welch was arrested in the summer of 2021 after he killed Keith Michael Edwards in a parking lot. According to the police, the incident happened at an AutoZone near Las Vegas Boulevard North. David had gone to check on his girlfriend's daughter, who happened to be homeless and living in the area. When he drove into the parking lot, he saw the homeless man there. The pair already had a history, and there was some bad blood between them. And as David was trying to check on his girlfriend's daughter, Keith stood there and trash-talked him. He was insulting him so incessantly that David got sick of it. He then got back in his car and drove the homeless man over. David even thought about his choices before going through with it. He got into his car, backed out of the parking spot, and then paused for a few seconds while staring at Keith through the windshield. In the end, though, he made his decision and hit the gas, running the homeless man over, ultimately ending his life. 5. Bad roommates. On January 5th, 2023, police officers were dispatched to an apartment in Leominster, Massachusetts, because a pair of roommates had gotten into a fight. When the police arrived on the scene, one of the roommates was waiting at the door. She told the cops that her roomie, a woman named Rose Baez, had already fled. The apartment's resident, who was still there, Jen Sylvia, was visibly injured while talking to the officers, with a cut to her face from where Rose had bashed her head against the floor. Jen and Rose weren't good roommates. In fact, Rose was moving out that same day. As she packed her belongings, she still fought and argued with Jen. At one point, Jen was on the phone with her family members who were bad-mouthing Rose while the woman was still in earshot. Jen's family knew about the situation and were happy that Rose was moving out. But if they'd just waited a few minutes to do their trash talking, things might have turned out a bit better. Instead, Rose was thrown into a fit of rage. She pushed Jen on the floor, punched her in the face, and then pounded her head against the ground. Then she ran away when she realized the cops were on their way. Running away never really solves the problem, though, and the police soon caught up with her. She was charged with assault and battery, but was released shortly after on a bail of just $40. 4. Facebook drama. A sheriff's deputy abused his power by having his ex-wife arrested in January of 2015, all because he got upset about some bad-mouthing that she was doing on Facebook. This was a clear case of petty social media drama pushed to its limits. Ann King posted a Facebook status saying that she was frustrated with her ex, Corey King, because he refused to drop off medication for their kids when he went to work. At the time, everyone in her household was sick with the flu, But Corey had better things to do than drop off medicine for his family. The status update soon turned into a free-for-all. Anne's friends started chiming in, and the whole thing became a vicious attack. It was obvious what Anne's friends thought of Corey. When he realized people were trash-talking him on the internet, Corey became extremely angry. He ordered Anne to take the post down, but she refused. So he filed an incident report and requested that his ex-wife be arrested for making derogatory statements against him. The next day, a Washington County court issued arrest warrants for Anne King and her friend Susan Hines, who'd commented on the post. Both women were charged with criminal defamation of character and were forced to post $1,000 bails. But luckily, after the hearing, the judge dropped the case because it was unfounded, and then filed a lawsuit against the county and the sheriff's office. And in 2019, she was awarded $100,000. When she initially filed the lawsuit, her friend Susan was in on it too. But before it was ever resolved, Susan backed out because she didn't want to cause friction in the community. 3. Lindsay Stone. In 2012, the internet shamed Lindsay Stone into a black pit of misery after she posted a photo on Facebook of her joking around at a war memorial. If there's one place you shouldn't be goofing off, it's almost definitely a war memorial. She had the picture snapped of her at the Arlington National Cemetery in Virginia. The cemetery has a sign asking for silence and respect, and in the photo, Lindsay posed in front of the sign, pretending to shout and flipping off all the dead people in the ground. The post went viral, and Lindsay found herself on the end of a ceaseless assault of anger and hate. She was called all kinds of names by war veterans and by the general community. She even lost her job as a health charity worker. But what could have possibly motivated her to take such an awful photo? Lindsay said in her defense that she and a friend had a long-running joke. Each of them would photograph themselves next to a sign doing the opposite of what the sign said. She wasn't trying to disrespect war veterans, she was just posing for a joke. Nobody was even supposed to see the photo. But Lindsay didn't understand how privacy settings on Facebook worked. It was her technological ignorance that resulted in everyone in America seeing her flip the bird to a cemetery full of war heroes. 2. The Parrot Witness. In 2015, a woman in Michigan was found guilty of shooting her husband 5 times. And the key witness in the case was a bad-mouthing parrot. Glenna Durham shot her husband Martin in full view of their pet parrot, an African gray who went by the name of Bud. Like most parrots, Bud was able to mimic sounds that it heard in its environment. Specifically, it could imitate things that people said to it, anything from bad words to pleas for help. After the brutal slaying of Martin, when the police were investigating, the parrot kept repeating the same phrase. It said, "Don't effing shoot," over and over again. Even more convincing was that the parrot said it in Martin's voice. Clearly, it was the last thing the parrot heard before Martin was shot 5 times. The parrot wasn't used in the court proceedings, even though it was extremely convincing. In the end, the jury didn't need the parrot to find Glenna Durham guilty of first-degree murder. She was subsequently sentenced to life behind bars for the crime. 1. Bad-mouthing the resort. An American man was in Thailand on vacation in 2020 when he decided to badmouth a hotel that he was staying at. Wesley Barnes wasn't necessarily trash-talking for the sake of it. He was just trying to leave a few negative reviews. He posted several scathing reviews of the Seaview Resort, with one even accusing them of modern slavery. He assumed that nothing would come of his trash talk and that he would simply write his review bashing the resort and go on with his holiday. Instead, Wesley was detained by Thai authorities and charged under extremely strict anti-defamation laws. What a lot of people don't realize when taking vacations is that many countries have laws making it more or less illegal to badmouth certain organizations or people. In Thailand, you absolutely cannot defame anyone. You can try, but you might wind up arrested. However, there might be a bit more to the story than meets the eye. According to the resort, Wesley wasn't a very good customer. Despite it being against the rules, he brought his own bottle of alcohol to the resort restaurant. And when the staff tried to tell him that he couldn't drink his own booze, Wesley caused a scene. When he left, he wrote mean reviews of the property, resulting in the hotel suing him for defamation. The resort claimed his views were fabricated and malicious in nature. Wesley almost found himself behind bars, but luckily for him, the story went viral and the resort faced even worse publicity as a result. The reviews may have been one thing, but now the resort was in the news for having its guests arrested. After making a deal with the property, Wesley was released and allowed to go about his business. All he had to do was write a series of apologies to foreign media organizations, the hotel itself, and Thailand's tourism authority.
9. Shakira. If you grew up during the early 2000s, you've most likely heard of the Grammy Award-winning pop singer Shakira, who rose to international stardom with her hit single Hips Don't Lie after becoming popular in the Spanish-speaking music market. She continued singing over the years, but eventually fell largely out of the spotlight to pursue what seemed like a more settled-down existence with her now ex-partner, Spanish soccer player Gerard Piqué. The couple welcomed their first child in 2013 while living in Barcelona. Shakira owns several homes outside Spain, including in Miami Beach, Uruguay, and the Bahamas. It's unclear how much time the Colombian beauty spent in all these places over the last several years, but the Spanish government thinks she's lying about her time in Spain. And so, they're eager to get their hands on the $15 million in back taxes they claim she owes. Authorities charged Shakira with tax evasion in 2022 and are accusing her of failing to pay taxes for time she spent living in Spain in 2012 and 2014. They claim that the singer spent more than 6 months of each year in the country and that she's therefore required to pay income taxes. Prosecutors are also accusing her of concealing her income and hiding assets through shell companies during those years. A representative for Shakira has consistently argued that the singer has always paid her taxes and doesn't owe the Spanish treasury a single dime. During an interview with Elle magazine, Shakira maintained that she didn't live in Spain in 2012 or 2014 and that she was on tour for much of the period in question. In her words, there was no way she would even qualify as a resident because of how much time she spent out of the country. She went on to say, "The Spanish tax authorities saw that I was dating a Spanish citizen and started to salivate. It's clear they wanted to go after that money no matter what." Prosecutors offered Shakira a plea deal, but she refused to back down, and the case is slated to go to trial. They're now seeking an 8-year prison sentence and a $24 million fine. While the outcome of the case remains to be seen, if Spain's justice system is anywhere near as unforgiving as some other countries when it comes to defendants rejecting plea deals, the consequences could be painfully harsh if she's convicted. Shakira told Elle magazine that her decision to stand trial is a matter of principle. In other words, she believes it's the right thing to do regardless of the potential outcome. 8. Michael Hash. Eric Weekly and his childhood friends Michael Hash and Jason Cloby were arrested in 2000 for the murder of an elderly woman that had occurred 4 years earlier in Culpeper County, Virginia. 74-year-old church organist and retired mail carrier Thelma Scroggins had been shot 4 times in the head at her home in 1996. Hoping for a lighter sentence, a woman who was serving time for armed robbery in an unrelated case implicated Hash, Weekly, and Cloby in the crime. The trio were innocent, but the authorities were convinced otherwise. Prosecutors then offered the defendants lenient sentences in exchange for pleading guilty. Exasperated and desperate to get the case over with so he could reunite with his young daughter as soon as possible, Weekly gave a false confession and took the deal. He was sentenced to 6 years and 8 months behind bars as a result. Cloby chose to go to trial and was acquitted after proving he wasn't even in town on the day of Scroggins' murder. And unwilling to admit to something he didn't do no matter what the cost, Hash also rejected the offer. He was convicted at trial and received the maximum sentence of life without parole. Hash didn't do anything wrong by refusing to confess to a crime he didn't commit. In fact, many if not most people would argue that he did the exact right thing by maintaining his innocence. And if anything, the case demonstrates a gross failure of the justice system, rather than the unfortunate consequences of a defendant rejecting a plea offer. But there's no denying that Hash's decision backfired terribly. After being released for his much shorter sentence in 2006, Weekly was approached by attorneys from the University of Virginia Innocence Project. They were interested in fighting to exonerate Hash, but needed Weekly to admit that he falsely confessed to the murder. After mulling it over with his family, he agreed to provide a statement. Weekly signed an affidavit recanting his confession and the testimony against Hash that he'd given at trial. The Innocence Project lawyers took it to court along with other evidence pointing toward Hash's innocence, including the complete lack of DNA and other physical evidence tying him to the crime scene. Luckily, the court vacated Hash's conviction in 2012 and he was freed from prison. Weekly's conviction was finally erased from his record 10 years later in 2022. 7. Ivan Safronov. Russia is notorious for handing down shockingly harsh prison sentences to criminal defendants, especially in cases involving an alleged betrayal against the country. So, it might have been in 32-year-old journalist Ivan Safronov's best interests to accept the prosecution's offer for a 12-year sentence in exchange for his confession to treason. Safronov was a highly respected correspondent for the leading independent news agencies Kommersant and Vedomosti. He eventually left journalism, though, to work as an advisor to the head of Russia's space agency Roscosmos. Then, in 2020, he was arrested for allegedly sharing military secrets with Czech spies. Roscosmos officials insisted that Safronov didn't have access to state secrets during his time working for the agency. But the truth seems to be an arbitrary thing when it comes to Russia's justice system, and this inconvenient detail was overlooked. According to the BBC's Russian service, the charges are believed to stem from an article Safronov wrote about the country's sales of Su-35 fighter jets to Egypt, which in the BBC's words, triggered a diplomatic outcry. In other words, several countries weren't happy about it. Unfortunately, we may never know exactly why Safronov was accused of treason, given the notoriously secretive nature of Russian leadership. The country is also known for its lack of a perceived obligation to explain why they convict people and throw them in prison. But Safronov felt that the 12-year deal offered by prosecutors was unfair, so he chose to take a gamble and go to trial. Not surprisingly, he was convicted of the treason charge and was sentenced to 22 years behind bars in early 2023. The ruling sparked widespread outrage among his supporters, who've long believed that the allegations against him were exaggerated and were possibly even baseless to begin with. Many journalists have accused the authorities of punishing Safronov for his news reporting. Simply put, they believe that something he wrote embarrassed Putin and his cronies, and that this is the price he's paying for it. Even the European Union has acknowledged Russia's history of systematic repression against independent journalists, but sadly, it's nothing new. Safronov's lawyers said they plan to appeal the case, but we don't know much more than that at the moment. 6. Kevin O'Brien Allen. By the time he got arrested for selling $20 of weed to his friend in Bossier Parish, Louisiana, Kevin O'Brien had a handful of drug convictions under his belt. His priors included marijuana possession with intent to distribute in 2004, marijuana possession in 2007 and 2011, and methamphetamine possession in 2013. Despite his past decisions, he held a steady job, took care of his family, and had no history of violence. Allen was unaware that his friend Justin Shealy was working as a confidential informant for law enforcement when he sold him 2 $10 bags of marijuana. Although he was essentially caught red-handed and had a prior record, Allen was shocked when prosecutors offered him a 5-year prison sentence in exchange for pleading guilty to 2 counts of marijuana distribution. It seemed excessive, so he turned it down and the case went to trial in 2014. But unfortunately for Allen, the jury convicted him on both counts. When it came to sentencing, it didn't matter that Allen's prior convictions were non-violent. Under Louisiana law, he was considered a habitual offender, and it gave prosecutors considerable power to push for as heavy of a sentence as they saw fit, including life behind bars. The judge overseeing the case imposed 2 10-year terms, which were to run concurrently with one another. But this was simply meant as a placeholder until Allen's habitual offender hearing, which would decide his actual punishment. Before the hearing, prosecutors made another plea offer for a 20-year sentence, which Allen rejected. He was then convicted and sentenced to life with no parole, and has languished behind bars ever since. Allen doesn't deny selling weed, but he thinks the sentence is unfair, and a growing number of people agree with him. His case has been featured in the New Orleans Advocate and other media outlets as a troubling example of Louisiana's habitual offender law being applied unfairly and excessively. Even lawmakers have joined in the fight to change the policy by introducing an amendment that would give current district attorneys the power to reduce sentences like Allen's. And in some cases, this would even secure their release through post-conviction plea agreements. The law passed, but Allen's fight for freedom continues. 5. Raymond Lindsay Jr. In Texas, in early 2015, police accused 46-year-old Raymond Lindsay Jr. of slamming his apartment door in an officer's face and threatening to kill several others while they responded to a call about an argument between him and his girlfriend. He also allegedly broke several items inside the apartment, including a TV, a glass coffee table, an entertainment center, and a cage with a live bird inside. Lindsay was charged with assault on a public servant and retaliation, and spent the next 19 months in jail while awaiting the outcome of his case. His court-appointed lawyer, Willis Everett Smith, told the Houston Chronicle that he didn't think Lindsay's anger was necessarily directed at the police, but that his client was more unstable than anything else. At one point, prosecutors offered a deal that would credit Lindsay with time served and enable him to walk free in exchange for pleading guilty to a reduced assault charge. But he turned the offer down because he reportedly believed that everyone involved in the case had conspired against him. Smith said he warned Lindsay that turning down the deal meant that the court would hold his lengthy criminal record against him and that he'd likely face a sentence of 25 years to life. The attorney also said that in his 30 years of practicing law, he'd never had another client turn down such an advantageous plea offer. Apparently unmoved by the prospect of a lengthy prison sentence, Lindsay simply replied, "It is what it is." The decision to reject the deal was evidently shocking enough for Smith to request a psychiatric evaluation of his client. Lindsay was found competent to stand trial though, and the case moved forward. In the end, he was convicted of both charges and received a 40-year prison sentence. According to Smith, Lindsay didn't get mad about the sentence. Instead, he told his lawyer, "It's all good, you did your best." Lindsay challenged the court's decision to enhance his punishment as a habitual felony offender, but the ruling was upheld. 4. Sandra Avery. As a young adult, Sandra Avery struggled with a crack cocaine addiction. After being convicted 3 times of possessing $100 worth of the drug for personal use in the state of Florida, she cleaned up her life and joined the army. During her time in the military, Avery earned her accounting degree. She was later honorably discharged from the army and ended up landing a good job. Trouble found Avery again though a decade later, after she married a drug dealer and fell back into her addictive habit. At 47 years old, she ended up back in a courtroom, this time facing federal drug charges. Prosecutors gave Avery 2 choices: take a plea deal and agree to a reduced charge in exchange for a 10-year mandatory minimum prison sentence, or go to trial. She would later claim that nobody told her that her prior convictions made her eligible for a sentence enhancement, and that she'd face the maximum punishment of life if convicted. Believing that a decade-long sentence was excessive, Avery chose to go to trial. She was found guilty in 2005 and was consequently sentenced to life without parole. With the way the federal system's set up, judges don't always have much say, if any, in an offender's sentence, and prosecutors often have considerable power in determining the punishment. In Avery's case, it wasn't up to the judge. Advocates were shocked by what seemed like an overly stiff sentence for non-violent crimes, especially considering the years Avery spent serving the country and staying out of trouble before she relapsed. She even thought that the 10-year minimum that she was offered in the plea deal she turned down seemed harsh as well. Avery spent the next 9 years in prison, thinking she'd most likely remain there until her dying day. Her luck changed dramatically, however, at the end of 2015, when President Obama commuted her sentence, along with the sentences of 94 other prisoners who were serving seemingly unjust punishments. During an interview with the non-profit Families Against Mandatory Minimums in 2021, Avery said she was more shocked to learn she was being freed than she was when she received her life sentence. Since her release, she's remained sober. She enjoys her job as a tour guide in Savannah, Georgia, and continues to look forward to the future. 3. Fantasia Toran. The onset of the COVID-19 pandemic in 2020 came with some heated debates about social distancing, mask wearing, and other measures that were put in place by the CDC. And in many cases, people were legally required to follow these guidelines in order to prevent the virus from spreading. One such argument that occurred at the Syracuse Community Health Center in upstate New York got tragically out of hand, leading to the fatal stabbing of 44-year-old mother of 12 Chanel Price Green. And in the end, authorities charged 47-year-old Julius Brown and 26-year-old Fantasia Toran with the murder. According to the prosecutors, Toran and Price Green went to the health center separately for medical care. While waiting to be seen, Price Green allegedly got too close to Toran, who was pregnant at the time. Toran supposedly made some comments, and a heated disagreement ensued between the two women. At some point, Toran went outside and called Brown, who came to the center to back her up. The couple waited until Price Green exited the building, then stabbed her to death. Authorities accused Brown of inflicting the fatal stab wound to Price Green's heart, and they accused Toran of helping him. Brown was convicted of manslaughter and was subsequently sentenced to 25 years in prison. Prosecutors offered Toran a deal that would come with a 5-year prison sentence in exchange for pleading guilty to attempted manslaughter, but she turned it down. As a result, she was convicted of orchestrating the deadly attack and received a 25-year prison sentence. 2. Lakeith Smith. One day in 2015, 5 young men decided to rob some houses in Millbrook, Alabama. And after hitting their first property, they entered a second residence. The occupants weren't home, but someone saw what was going on and alerted the police, who arrived to discover the burglary in progress. Someone allegedly shot at the responding officers from inside the home. The cops returned fire, fatally striking one of the suspects, Adonte Washington. A grand jury cleared the officer of any wrongdoing after reviewing body cam footage, which reportedly showed Washington rushing toward the cop with a gun in his hand. Authorities blamed one of the other burglars, Lakeith Smith, for Washington's death. They knew he didn't pull the trigger, but under Alabama's Accomplice laws, a co-conspirator can be held responsible for someone's death simply for participating in the acts that led up to the fatality. Smith was charged with felony murder and various other crimes in connection with the case. In an effort to avoid going to trial, prosecutors offered him a plea deal that would come with a 25-year prison sentence. But after weighing his options, Smith rejected it. Before the first witnesses were called to the stand, the judge overseeing the case offered Smith one last chance to take the deal, but he turned it down a second time and the case proceeded. The jury convicted Smith of felony murder, burglary, and 2 counts of theft. And as a result, he was sentenced to 30 years for the murder conviction, 15 years for the burglary charge, and 10 years each for the theft counts. The judge ordered him to serve the sentences back-to-back, amounting to 65 years behind bars, with an earliest possible parole date after 20 to 25 years. The 25-year sentence offered by prosecutors would have put Smith away for a long time, but he was hit with more than double the time he would have been looking at if he took the deal. Smith refused to show any sign of being upset, however, and instead grinned in the courtroom after being handed the stiff sentence. Chief Assistant District Attorney C.J. Robinson told USA Today that the prosecution was pleased with the sentence and that he didn't think Smith would smile for long after arriving at prison. But many people felt sympathetic towards Smith because he was young, and they also believed a murder conviction was unfair since Smith didn't fire the shot that killed Washington. Even Washington's own father said that he didn't blame the young man for his son's death. Afterward, Smith's lawyer won a resentencing hearing, and in 2023, the same judge who imposed the 65-year sentence ordered his terms to run concurrently instead of consecutively, effectively reducing his sentence to 30 years. He also received credit for the 8 years he'd already served. Under state law, Smith is required to serve either 15 years or 85% of his sentence behind bars, whichever comes first. This means that Smith could see freedom after 7 more years in prison, at which point he'll be around 30 years old. But his defense team is unsatisfied with the new sentence and plans to appeal the decision and possibly fight for a new trial. 1. Robert Rose. When 19-year-old Robert Rose arrived at his home in Queens, New York one day in 1992 and saw his mother's boyfriend standing outside with a gun, he tried to avoid a confrontation. But the man approached him and a struggle ensued as Rose wrestled for control of the firearm. He saw his mother's boyfriend reaching for something and thought it might be another gun, so he pulled the trigger on the weapon they were fighting over and shot his opponent multiple times. The man died, and Rose turned himself in to authorities the next day, and he was subsequently indicted for murder. Prosecutors offered Rose a 3 to 9 year prison sentence in exchange for a guilty plea, because he had no criminal history and knew that he acted in self-defense. Rose took his chances on a trial, believing, perhaps naively so, that the jury would take his side. As you've likely guessed by now, the exact opposite happened. The judge found Rose guilty, and he received a 25-year prison sentence as a result. He served 24.5 years and was released shortly before the COVID-19 pandemic. By then, he was in his mid-40s and had lost a large chunk of his life to the prison system. Rose's case highlights an ongoing trend in New York State, where defendants who turn down plea offers and choose to go to trial face severely harsh consequences compared to the terms laid out in the deal. Dubbed the trial penalty, it's the reason many criminally accused individuals plead out, even in cases where they don't truly feel they're guilty or despite their belief that the sentence offered in a plea is unfair. In most cases, though, it's much lighter than the punishment that could come with a trial conviction, and many defendants err on the side of better safe than sorry. As Rose unfortunately learned, those who dare to challenge their case are often served with disproportionately heavy outcomes.
Number 10. Coral Edgar. In 2020, 26-year-old aspiring model Coral Edgar lured her ex-boyfriend Lee McKnight to her home in the English city of Carlisle with the promise of a booty call. When McKnight arrived, he was tied to a chair and viciously attacked by a group of people over some drug debts that he owed. The assailants beat McKnight within an inch of his life and then tossed him into a nearby river where he drowned. A farmer found his body several hours later. A medical examiner counted 36 different head wounds, several cracked and broken ribs, and a fractured skull, and described McKnight's body as resembling a torture victim. The injuries showed that he was punched, kicked, stomped on, and struck with a riding crop, later identified as the property of Coral's mother, 47-year-old Carol Edgar. As it turned out, McKnight was a street-level drug dealer. He was in debt to one of the suspects, 26-year-old Jamie Davison, who was reportedly under pressure from high-level dealers to pay up. Davison recruited 26-year-old Aaron Graham and 18-year-old Jamie Lee Roberts as extra muscle, and Carol Edgar was also present during the beating. Jamie Roberts' father, 51-year-old Paul Roberts, brought his son fresh clothes after the fight and destroyed Jamie's blood-stained clothing. Coral and the other suspects were charged with McKnight's murder. In court, Coral claimed that she curled up into a ball and cried while everyone else assaulted McKnight. She insisted that she only witnessed one punch being thrown and that she didn't see the attackers, and that she was too afraid to confront them due to her fragile mental health. Meanwhile, the rest of the defendants also maintained their innocence and pointed the finger at each other. Everyone, including Coral, was found guilty. Coral received a life sentence with a minimum of 13.5 years. Coral, who admitted to letting the attackers use her car to transport McKnight to the river, was sentenced to life with a minimum of 13 years. Davison received the harshest sentence of life with a minimum of 30 years, and the other 3 men were imprisoned for life with minimum sentences ranging between 16.5 and 26 years. Number 9. The Haight Murders. Early one morning in 2008, 911 operators in Effingham County, Georgia, received a call from a woman who could barely speak. She said she and 2 other family members were shot, and it took several minutes for her to explain where they lived. Law enforcement arrived at the home of a prominent and well-respected family to find 59-year-old Philip Haight and his 32-year-old son Carey shot dead in their beds. Philip's wife, Linda, the 911 caller, had also been shot but survived. Philip and Carey Haight were successful real estate investors who worked together in a family business. It was hard to understand who would want the church-going family men dead. Theories about a business deal gone bad, a mafia hit, and bad blood with meth dealers who lived nearby quickly failed to pan out. Detectives eventually began to look toward Philip's other son and Carey's brother, Craig, as possibly being involved. Unlike Carey, Craig didn't follow in his father's footsteps. He lived in an isolated cabin in the woods and often failed to hold steady employment. And he was having an affair with Robin Haight, his brother's wife and the mother of Carey's 3 children. The affair had deeply divided the Haight family. Tensions worsened when Philip confronted Robin about her actions and nearly reached a boiling point when Carey sent a helicopter over Craig's cabin in search of evidence of the affair. That alone seemed like motive enough for Craig to murder his dad and brother, but investigators soon uncovered evidence of an additional incentive. Shortly before the murders, Craig had looked into buying a large amount of land that he couldn't have possibly afforded on his own, telling the realtor that he expected to run into big money soon. And while Carey was a good provider for his family, even after he and Robin separated, his estranged wife didn't have access to the kind of money Craig would need to make the purchase. Not as long as he was alive, at least. But there was a $3.5 million insurance policy on Carey's life, and killing the family would make Craig the sole beneficiary of Philip's sizable estate. Thankfully, he fell under legal scrutiny before he could get his hands on any of the money. In 2009, following a 9-month investigation, Craig was charged with 11 crimes in connection with the attack, including murder, aggravated battery, aggravated assault, attempted arson, and burglary. He was convicted on all counts and was sentenced to 2 life terms plus 85 years, but continues to maintain his innocence. Robin Haight denied any involvement in the murders. She said the affair with Craig began when Carey's work demands caused him to neglect the marriage, and that Craig gave her the attention she craved and wasn't getting from her husband. While some believe she had some knowledge of the murders beforehand, these suspicions were never proven, and she was never criminally charged. Number 8. Joshua Dodson. While searching for an 18-year-old wanted car thief named Joshua Dodson in 2022, police raided his girlfriend's home in Manchester, England. They initially found no signs of the 6-foot-tall fugitive, but then they noticed that a large stuffed bear in the corner of a room appeared to be breathing. Dodson had cut a hole in the stuffed animal's bottom and somehow wriggled his way inside. He ultimately admitted to stealing an SUV, a van, and 2 tablets, driving without a license, and speeding away from a gas station without paying. The judge imposed a 9-month jail sentence, along with a 27-month driving ban. In a tweet, the Greater Manchester Police wrote that Dodson was now stuffed behind bars and that they had a more than bearable time bringing him to justice. Number 7. Benjamin and Erica Sifrit. During a Memorial Day vacation to Ocean City, Maryland in 2002, 24-year-old former Navy SEAL Benjamin Sifrit and his wife Erica befriended 32-year-old Joshua Edward Ford and 51-year-old Martha Guinea Crutchley. Joshua and Martha were a couple from Fairfax, Virginia, who were also vacationing in the area. The two couples partied together at a nightclub before going back to the Sifrit's penthouse suite to continue drinking. At some point during the night, the Sifrits accused Ford and Crutchley of stealing Erica Sifrit's purse. The disagreement ended with Ford and Crutchley being killed and dismembered. Their remains were thrown in a dumpster in neighboring southern Delaware. 3 days passed before the victims were reported missing. Police checked their hotel room and found nothing unusual. In the meantime, the Sifrits continued their wild vacation without a care in the world. A week after the murders, they were caught committing a botched robbery at a Hooters restaurant. While searching Erica's purse, an officer found Ford and Crutchley's IDs, along with some spent bullet casings, handcuffs, and the gun that was later proven to be the murder weapon. A ring Erica was wearing was later identified as belonging to Ford. Police found more evidence at the Sifrits' condo, including a photo of the murdered couple, a bullet hole in the bathroom door, and blood on the wall that had been cleaned up. Based on the evidence, it appeared as though Crutchley and Ford tried to hide in the bathroom, but were ultimately unable to escape their killers. Investigators recovered body parts belonging to the couple from a landfill, but were unable to determine Crutchley's manner of death. They also failed to determine a motive for the double murder, but they don't believe the victims tried to steal Erica's purse, and they're pretty sure that the Sifrits knowingly falsely accused the pair. Both Erica and Benjamin Sifrit appeared to be on paths to success until they met each other and derailed as they fell into each other's previously hidden dark sides. To this day, Benjamin Sifrit has refused to talk, and Erica has given extremely limited information. Benjamin was convicted of 1 count of second-degree murder and received a 38-year sentence. He became eligible for parole in 2017 and has been denied so far, but will be released in 2030. Erica was convicted of first and second-degree murder and was sentenced to life in prison plus 20 years. Number 6. Gregory Fester and Jessica Reed. In 2006, 19-year-old Gregory Fester and his girlfriend Jessica Reed embarked on a multi-state crime spree. It started in Wisconsin, where they stole 2 vehicles along with money, guns, and ammunition. They proceeded to Iowa, where they burglarized 2 houses, making off with $300 and some more ammunition. On the 3rd night, they drove to rural Cass County, Nebraska, and entered the home of a well-respected older couple named Wayne and Shannon Stock, with plans to burglarize it. Armed with 2 shotguns, the couple made their way upstairs where the couple was sleeping. Wayne woke up and tried to wrestle one of the guns from Fester. Reed shot him during the struggle, and he collapsed to the floor, at which point Fester fired a bullet into the back of his head and then fatally shot Shannon in the face. The suspects fled the scene and returned to Wisconsin. At the Stocks' home, police found a uniquely engraved ring that the perpetrators had left behind. They contacted its manufacturer, and a manager eventually found the record of sale from many years earlier. The ring had been stolen in one of Reed and Fester's thefts in Wisconsin, and investigators eventually managed to connect it to the couple. Reed eventually caved under pressure and admitted that she and Fester were responsible for the double murder. She made it sound like she acted at Fester's beck and call, but some diary entries found by police suggest that she got a disturbing level of enjoyment out of the crime and would possibly do it again. As far as motives go, it appears as though the couple went on the crime spree for a sick thrill and needed money to keep it going. Fester pleaded guilty to 2 counts of second-degree murder and a gun charge and was sentenced to life plus 20 years. Reed pleaded guilty to 2 counts of second-degree murder and received 2 consecutive life sentences. Number 5. Ellen Snyder. In 2002, a 43-year-old former mechanic with multiple sclerosis named Mike Snyder went missing in Albuquerque, New Mexico. His wife Ellen said little about his disappearance until she was prodded for answers, at which point she claimed that Mike had skipped town and left her for his gay lover. She finally filed a missing persons report 4 months after her husband vanished. In 2003, she told police that she spoke with Mike and that he was doing fine. Meanwhile, she continued filing tax returns in his name and collected his social security checks on his behalf. Ellen eventually divorced Mike on grounds of abandonment and was awarded the couple's home and possessions. The Snyders' marriage was clearly in peril before Mike disappeared, but Ellen managed to evade any major scrutiny in the case for nearly 8 years. She eventually lost the house she and Mike had built together to foreclosure. Finally, in 2010, police received a tip that Mike was buried in a deep grave beneath a garage that the new property owner had built. They got to digging and, sure enough, found his remains. He had been shot multiple times. Michael Sheffield, Ellen's son from a previous marriage, was finally old enough to be questioned without his mother's presence or consent. He told investigators that he awoke to gunshots one morning and tried to call 911, but his mother told him to hang up and go back to sleep, and that everything was fine. Ellen later summoned Sheffield's help with getting rid of Snyder's body and hired a backhoe to dig the hole. By then, she had allegedly destroyed the family's finances despite having a high-paying career, amassing nearly $500,000 in debts and racking up 30 forgery convictions. Authorities charged Ellen with enough crimes to be locked away for 250 years if convicted. Prosecutors made it sound like a case of greed, citing financial motives and a desire to maintain ownership of the home she shared with Mike and full custody of their daughter. Ellen's attorney, Penny Adrian, argued that money played no role in the case, which she described as a toxic relationship that spun out of control. Adrian claimed that Mike was abusive and that Ellen shot him in self-defense. To many, it sounds excessive to fire 8 bullets into a weakened man who was fraught with health problems. But by the time Ellen went to court, the case had exceeded the state's 6-year statute of limitations for second-degree murder, leaving prosecutors with 2 options: to prosecute her for first-degree murder and hope for a conviction, or to persuade her into taking a plea deal for a lesser charge. They opted for the latter, and Ellen pleaded guilty to voluntary manslaughter, tax fraud, and tampering with evidence. She was sentenced to 11 years in prison and was released in 2018. Number 4. Carione Brown. While responding to a shooting call at 1:30 in the morning in Memphis, Tennessee's Westwood neighborhood in late 2022, police found 21-year-old Jalen Faulkner lying on the ground unresponsive. He was rushed to the hospital in critical condition and later died from his injuries. Based on witness reports of a woman who was seen picking up items at the crime scene before police arrived, investigators identified the victim's girlfriend, 18-year-old Carione Brown, as their main suspect. During questioning, Brown allegedly admitted that Faulkner was shot during their failed attempt to rob a drug dealer together. According to investigators, she let her boyfriend use her Facebook account to lure the dealer to the area for a drug sale. He reportedly armed himself with 2 handguns, but was shot by someone in the dealer's car before he could pull either of the weapons. Brown reportedly told police that she took the guns and fled the crime scene. She was charged with reckless homicide, aggravated robbery, conspiracy to commit aggravated robbery, and tampering with and/or fabricating evidence. The young woman is being held on bonds totaling $85,000 while she awaits the next step in her case. Number 3. Tavon Perkins and Jamal Taylor. Around 1:30 a.m. one morning in 2016, officers from Florida's Lake Mary and Orlando Police Department arrived at a self-storage facility for a canine training exercise and discovered a burglary in progress. 2 masked men were using bolt cutters to break into storage units when the police arrived with their dogs. It wasn't long before the officers noticed that the locks on some of the units showed signs of tampering. A few minutes later, they spotted one of the perpetrator's shadows. Surveillance footage showed the perpetrators calmly roaming around the facility for 20 minutes. It was a different story when police arrived. The suspects, later identified as Tavon Perkins and Jamal Taylor, ran the instant they saw the cops. Perkins was captured on the property, and Taylor was apprehended about an hour later after a police helicopter spotted him trying to hide beside a neighbor's house. The 2 men allegedly accessed the property through a portion of its perimeter fence that wasn't reinforced with barbed wire. Both suspects were booked into the Seminole County Jail on 1 count of burglary each. A customer named Gary Rivers arrived at his storage unit later that day and was unable to open it with his key. He told local station WESH that there were bolt cutter marks on his lock and that he was grateful to the cops for thwarting the burglary. Number 2. Magdi Gurgis. One evening in 2004, 2 masked intruders entered a well-to-do home in a gated community in Westminster, California, and stabbed 55-year-old Ariette Gurgis to death while restraining her teenage son, Ryan. During questioning, Ryan was unable to give any identifying details about the killers. At the time, Harriet was separated from her estranged husband, Magdi, who was scheduled to go on trial soon for punching her in the face. Investigators theorized that he was worried about the case threatening his career as a respiratory therapist, and they also suspected that he wanted to avoid a costly divorce. Magdi's sons, Ryan and Richard, described their father as a penny pincher who was irrationally preoccupied with spending as little money as possible, despite having enough of it to live comfortably. He was allegedly outraged by the cost of renting an apartment after Harriet pressed charges against him and got an order of protection requiring him to move out, and his blood curdled at the thought of having to fork over a settlement or alimony payments, especially after years of controlling the finances with an iron fist and giving his wife a pitifully meager allowance to cover household expenses with. Magdi denied any involvement in Harriet's murder and moved back into the family home. He found a new lover, moved her in, and carried on with his life. The case went cold until 2013 when a DNA sample from the scene matched to a known gang member named Anthony Edward Bridget, who was in prison on an unrelated case at the time. Bridget refused to speak to detectives, who decided to try tricking Magdi into incriminating himself by posing as relatives of the killers and shaking him down for continued payments for the hit. He took the bait, and both he and Bridget were charged with Harriet's murder. Magdi continued to maintain his innocence, even after his estranged son Ryan urged him to confess. Neither Ryan nor Richard had anything to do with their father at that point, and they believed Magdi had murdered their mother. A jury agreed, and both Magdi and Bridget were convicted and sentenced to life in prison. Bridget's accomplice remains unidentified. Number 1. Burglary victim gets revenge with a bang. After having the window of his pickup truck smashed 8 times over a 3-month period in repeated break-ins, a veterinarian from New Orleans took matters into his own hands. Brendan Batt knew better than to leave anything valuable inside the vehicle, but was tired of having to pay to have his window replaced every time a thief smashed it in order to see if there was anything worth taking inside. He booby-trapped the truck with what he described as a flash bang, which was designed to startle but not physically harm a thief. Speaking with local station 4WWL, he later described the device as a 12-gauge round with no projectile that shoots gunpowder and is extremely loud. To ensure that the flashbang wouldn't cause any serious injuries, he ran a few test rounds. Sure enough, it was only a matter of time before the homemade explosive came in handy. Batt had been rigging the truck daily for 2 months when a curious criminal targeted the vehicle yet again in early 2022. Surveillance footage showed a car pulling up to Batt's truck on the street. A masked individual exited the car, smashed the truck's window, and leaned inside to look for valuables. Just a few seconds later, the thief activated the tripwire and the flashbang exploded in his face. Batt told 4WWL that he doesn't recommend resorting to this method of schooling a criminal, but he was unapologetic about his decision to do so. The New Orleans Police Department investigated the case and found no reason to criminally charge him, but also cautioned the public to dial 911 instead of taking matters into their own hands. Thanks for watching. Would you rather have a burglar get away with stealing some nice but not extremely expensive or sentimental items from your home, or lose one of your most treasured valuables to a home intruder and never get it back, but at least see them arrested and charged for the crime? Let us know in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe. See you soon. Bye.